Anincho Kanawia, Chinishnapik, Ugimakanak, I don't see any. Chinishnapik, Nichiu Kiknama Gake, Nichiu Kiknama Ganak Shigo Putek, Chiken Tamumaya Yanungam. So I said, hello all, the old ones, I don't like calling them elders. So during my presentation, I will refer to them as Chinishnapik. The chiefs, my fellow teachers, my fellow students, and all the visitors. I'm happy to be here today. So my presentation is on my language and my journey and how I got to where I am and what my language did for me. Oh, I already did that, sorry. So language is the main way people communicate and express themselves. People are born without language. Languages are learned. Our legends, our stories, everything was passed down orally in the various languages. And they were passed down from one generation to the next. And in order to maintain our culture, we have to have our language. Language is very important. Traditionally, the role of the and function within the language First Nations families was language is taught at home. It was taught by the grandparents, the great-grandparents. They taught the children, the grandchildren. That's how they passed it on. It's very difficult to try and maintain our culture without this language because English is not ours and it doesn't suit our needs. So when I started my journey, long ago I started school. I'm still in school. I'm going to be 59 this year. I started school, how old, what, 6? So that's how long my journey has been. So when I first started university, I wanted to be a business person. And my auntie kept telling me, no, come into language, we need somebody. I said, no, I don't want to. I want to make money, I was telling her. And my grandfather helped me when I started taking university classes. He couldn't read or write in English, but he helped me with my SOTO homework. He would say the words, I would write them, and then I learned how to write the writing system. So my auntie would tell me, after I'd get an assignment back or a quiz, you tell Papa he just about got 100%, she'd tell me. So that's how he helped me. So when I was on this journey, when I started my master's, I did a story with Nainawe Panesik. She was one of our knowledgeable Chinishnapik. Her real name was Annie Kiwaitan. So I did her story in my master's. And at that time, we couldn't do Indigenous knowledge. It wasn't recognized at the university. So I had a hard time writing. I had to write it in third person, and it was very hard. And I couldn't use any of her teachings. Because she didn't publish anything, then her word was nothing to the university. So that got me mad. So I just looked at something that we use in Anishinaabe, and it only happens in Anishinaabe. There's a little particle we call me. It helps us either focus our stories on something, or it points out something, and that's what I did. But during her story, I had to translate her story into English, and I had to grammatically analyze it, meaning I had to break up everything. And that's where my grandfather helped me. He was a linguist. He didn't know it. He could break up words without knowing how to read or write, but he could do it in his mind. So that got me interested in the language, because when he'd tell me what it really meant, the intention or meaning of the word, that got me interested. So then I went into language, and I kept on, and I thought, okay, well, I need to do more. I don't know enough. So I kept on going into language, learning about language. So the first question I asked myself when I was on this journey, who am I? Well, my answer is Lynn Dijnikas. Lynn is my name. Nano Kasik. Nta Anishinaabe Wizuin. Hummingbird is my Anishinaabe name. But that's just so plain. So I kept thinking, well, really, who am I? Where do I come from? So I asked myself, Ande Wayne Dusayan, where do I come from? So the answer was Cote Shkuniganing. I come from those leftover lands called Cote. Cote Kajnikate Shkuniganing. You know, and I thought of that, well, these are leftover lands. Where do we really come from? So then I had to go and look at family, because that's where our roots lie, within our family. When I thought of it, it was my family that taught me, not these teachers in education. All they did was wake me up. So I looked at family, and I enjoy etymology. When I got into linguistics, etymology was something I really enjoyed. Etymology is the origin of words, so the original meaning of words. And that's what I try to use now. So when I looked up family, I had to look at the English meaning. What does family mean to them? So family is familia, which the origin is in Latin. English does this too. They look for the origins. So then I looked, okay, what's our word for family? We don't have one. That's not a concept of ours, because look at the translation of family. It's household staff, or, you know, or a slave. And that's what they call their family. So I don't use that word. I try not. My little slaves, I'll go home and tell my kids. So then I broke up that word the way my grandpa taught me. Inawem, which means be related to. So, Dinawe ma, I'm related to him. I have relations with him. Dinawe maganak, my relations, my relatives. So that's how that word came to be. My family. Not my family, my relations, my relatives. So then I asked, okay, that's where I come from then. Awene nak, dinawe maganak, who's my family? And this is where I started looking back into my family. Awene nanigi go, who are my parents? Patrick Gagi Usian. And I'm using the old terms, nose for my father and ga for my mother, not nigga, ga. So Patrick Gagi Usian. Patrick was my late father. Kepanajio Pnesiunin. Gagi Anishnape Weezawit. His Anishnape was Hawk Thunderbird Man. Fe Gagi Ugayan. Faye was my late mother. Wape kukuku, Gagi Anishnape Weezawin. White Owl was her Anishnape name. So this is where I was thinking, okay, well, you know, they're feathered. You know, they come from, their names have to do with birds. Oh, sorry, before I go on, my father was from Cote. Originally, that's his birthplace, Cote. My mother was a Shingus from Valley River. My mother and father were both language speakers. They were both traditional people, but they were both residential school survivors at the same time. The good thing about it is they kept their language through residential school. Even though they were punished, they kept it. They knew it was important. And my dad was part of a ceremonial family, so he knew that he had to keep it. My dad ended up, well, both my parents ended up alcoholics. But my dad beat it, and he came through and he quit drinking. He was a chief of the reserve for a while. He had his own business, and he taught us work ethics. He taught us to go out there and work. Don't depend on anyone. Go get educated. Nobody's gonna help you but yourself. My grandfather too instilled those in us. Because he couldn't read or write, he didn't go to residential school. He went to day school, but he was still abused. My grandmother went to residential school. She was abused. But they didn't lose their language. They were kicked out of residential school when they were 13, 14. They were too old. That's what they were told, so they had to leave. So all my grandmother did, she said, is babysit, look after young ones, which she didn't mind because she helped them. She said she didn't want them to get beaten. She couldn't read or write either. My grandfather couldn't read or write. He said all that school taught him was to work. They used them as slaves and then made them pray all the time on their knees. And so, but they kept their language, they kept their traditions, and they taught us. They wanted to teach all of us. They raised 4 of us kids. I, my older sister, and 2 of my cousins, George Cote, Chief George Cote, and his brother Ted Cote, and my sister Noreen. My grandparents raised us together. So out of the 4, I'm the only one who listened. We do carry on what they taught us. We do have something that we carry on. So those are my parents and my grandparents. Before I go on, my grandmother was a Stevenson from Cote. They were considered Métis. They were signed on when everybody was put on the reserve up in Peepaw, when they started putting people on reserves. So old Chotty Stevenson's family got signed on to Cote. They were Métis. So my grandmother's a mixture of Métis and Swampy Cree and Anishinaabe. My grandfather was originally from, he was originally from Cote. His dad was from Cote. Then I asked myself, who are my grandfathers? John F. Cote kaki Umisumisyan. John F. Cote was my grandfather. Kanao Kizakunin kaki Anishinaabe Weezawit. His Anishinaabe name was Skykeeper. Peter Shingus kaki Umisumisyan. Peter Shingus was my grandfather. A little story about my grandfather's name. When I was a kid, I was very nosy. I was always asking questions, and me being a female, I wasn't supposed to ask male questions, but I'd always bug my grandfather. And my grandmother would tell me, don't, leave him alone, you're not supposed to. And he'd say, Ma, no, she wants to learn, I'll tell her. So I asked him, what's your name? And he said, John F. No. I said, what's your Indian name? I'm not an Indian. Okay, well, what's the name you were born with? So he told me, Kizakun Nene. I said, well, what does that mean? St. Peter, he said. And I said, well, what do you mean, St. Peter? I didn't know we had saints. And then, so he explained it. If you look in the Bible, St. Peter's the gatekeeper. And that's what my grandfather's name represents. He's the one that looks after the sky and looks after the gate for when we go over. So that's how he explained it to me. Then I asked, Awene no kuyak, who are my grandmothers? Madeleine kaki ukuyan. Madeleine was my grandmother. That's the one that raised me. Kiwait no Pinesi kwe, Shigun no Pinesi kwe were her names. Northern Thunderbird Woman and North Wind Thunderbird Woman and Northern Thunderbird Woman. She got one when she was young, when she was a baby, and then when she was a teenager, she earned her other name. She was the only one in the family who had 2 names. Eliza Kakiukuyan. Eliza was the name of my grandmother. Now this one, I don't know anything about my maternal side. I don't know who. My grandmother had an Indian name, but I don't know it. My grandmother Eliza came from Valley River. Originally, she was a Métis. She came from St. Catharines, and she married my grandfather John Shingus into Valley River. She understood French. She spoke Michif, and she also spoke Anishinaabe. She had a rough life. My grandfather Peter Shingus died when I think my youngest uncle must have been a baby, because we didn't get to meet Peter. He was already gone. He died of TB here at Fort Capel. And the story says that the day they were taking him home, there was a big storm, and that's where the train got stuck in between, around Little Black Bear there on that line. The train was stuck there for a week or so. So they say my grandfather's buried out there somewhere. We have to find that out to see if he is, because they have to bury the people that were on the train. My grandmother Eliza, after he passed away, she remarried. She remarried a man from Cote. His name was, we called him Achwenis. That was his part of his Indian name, but we didn't know what it meant. His name was Joseph Cote. So from there, my mom and her sister and 2 brothers were brought to Cote from Valley River. And they were registered in Cote after my mom remarried. And then my mom died young. She died young when my mom and her siblings were teenagers. And after that, my mom and her sister and brother had a rough life. There was nobody to look after them because their family wasn't here. Their family was in Manitoba. So what had happened is my great-grandparents looked after them. They would go to their house every day, and my great-grandparents would feed them. They'd look after them. And that's how it was long ago. You looked after each other. You know, it didn't matter who you were, you looked after each other. So, these are the ones that raised me, my grandfather John F. and my grandmother Madeleine. And I just put those pictures there because I know these are on the SICC site. My grandfather was a trapper. He was a ceremonial man. He held a couple lodges. And he was also very creative. He made cradle boards. And he also tanned hides. He made his own drums. And my grandmother was a seamstress. She made her own clothing. She never wore any store-bought clothing. She made her own dresses. And she did a lot of beadwork. She did the beadwork for the cradle boards and moss bags and moccasins and whatever anybody wanted. So those are the ones that helped shape me who I am today. When I look back, when I was looking back at my studies, you know, when I do my studies, sometimes I get frustrated, sometimes I get mad, and I tend to swear, you know, by myself. So then these words come to me, I hear them clearly. I hear my ancestors. I hear my grandfather. I hear my grandmother. I hear my dad. I hear my uncles. All the ones that helped me, all the ones that went on. My other relatives, I hear them. And these are some of the words that come to me. Akamenamon. I hear that a lot. You know, go keep on, don't give up. Mano. Leave it, let it be, but that has more of a deeper meaning. It's not yours to carry. Leave it, give it away. Mano. Minututan, do good, do well. We were always told that when we're doing something. Minututan. Goyak tutan, do right. When you're doing something, do things right. Don't do it in a bad way, do them right. Gego nishkatishikain. That's the main one. Every time I'm mad, I hear that. I could hear my grandmother. Gego nishkatishikain. You know, she'd make it sound to where she'd scare us not to be mad anymore. Then I'd hear Gego kimutkin. When I'm writing, that's where that comes in, because I see all this right. Oh, I'm going to take this and make it mine. You know, and that's where I hear my grandfather, Gego kimutkin. Don't take anything that's yours, especially words. Don't steal words, because they're not yours. Gego giunamukin. Don't lie. We were always told that as kids. You know, don't lie. Because there's someone here that watches you. And my grandfather used to tell me that because he was my main teacher, he used to tell me, Gego giunamukin. Gego gimutkin. Gego niskatisikin. He said, there's always someone here that watches you. There's a higher power. And he taught us this, and he taught us to pray. He said, there's a higher power here. Some people call him Manitou, him or her. Some call it Chimanitou, the Great Spirit. Some call it Gzemantu, the Compassionate Spirit. And from when he was teaching me, and when I'd hear him in the lodges and that, I would hear, me awake up iminang. And he explained it to me. That's our higher power. It's the one who watches, who goes around, traveling around, watching over everything. He watches you, he hears you. So that was his term for what we call God. Because I used to ask him, what's our name for God? We don't have one. We don't have a God. We have a higher power. And in order to please English, they use that word Manitou for God. But he called it Me Awake Up Iminang, the one who oversees everything. And so that's what I think of when I hear these words. Well, he's watching us. You know, he or she, I don't like to gender base. And then, Gego Macheo Kitken, don't say bad words, don't say anything bad, because they come back to you. You know, Unjine win is one of the rules we believe in, karma. You know, anything done to you comes back to you. Think good, have good thoughts when you're doing things, when you're talking to people, because the one that's watching over everything sees you, hears you. Ask for forgiveness. Or what do we use for pray? Ask for forgiveness. And do that every day, and that's what he taught us, to pray. Minopimatsin. Live a good life. Try to live a good life. And Zawainituin, love, I hear that a lot because there's so much turmoil and war right now. Even within our own communities, our own institutions, there's a lot of turmoil. And this is one that keeps coming up to me when I feel like fighting, you know? When I feel like arguing, then I hear my grandfather, Zawainituin, Manachituin, I hear him with those 7 teachings. You know, love. Love yourself first, then you can love others. Manachituin, use it in a good way. Respect it. You know, and respect yourself, respect others. And those words come to me when I tend to go off track. So I think that's the way my ancestors walk with me. They come to me. They're always with me. So then I asked Owainin Dan Gupichikanak, who are my great-grandparents, and I was so happy with, what's her name, that talked about Dan Gupichigan. Because with our word for Dan Gupichigan, it can be broken down like she said. Anko is the one that's repeating, the one that's going over and over. Piche has to be tied to. And gan is what makes it a noun. Nit is my. So the one that I'm tied to over and over, in front and behind, generations, Dangkupichigan. And that's our term for great-grandparents, because you're tied to them in the front, you're tied to them in the back. And the way I teach family terms to my students is I do TPR. And I always stress the family terms. Let's start using them because they have more meaning than mom, dad. If you look at our word for, like our word for great-grandparent, when you look at those things to be tied to, this is what I do with my TPR. I make them go niin. Niin. All my right side is my males. Top and bottom, my left side is my females. And I chose the left side because your female is the one your female side is the one you're closely related to. Because of the heart, that's why I took the left side for women. So, I'll try it this way. I don't know if you guys can see me. So I start off, ni. nose, misomes, dagopitigan, sounds knee, this, nenose, the nose state, or nose, dagopitigan. Nga, no ko, nemisomes. I mean, not Copenhagen, sorry. I'm just shaking here. I'm trying not to be nervous. Nin, Danis, Ninose, or Noses, Dan Copenhagen. That's your 7 generations. Me, my father, my grandfather, my great-grandfather, me, my son, my grandson, the smaller grandson, my great-grandson. Me, my mother, my grandmother, my great-grandmother, me, my daughter, my granddaughter, my smaller granddaughter, and my great-granddaughter. And there's your 7 generations. That Kupichigan is a reciprocal term because of our life cycle. We're born, we do the 4 life cycles, we come back to being an old person. And they always tell us, your great-grandparent and your child will look alike. And today we found that out, they do. My grandfather, my it'll be 3 greats. My great-great-great-grandfather, Chief William Cusans, and my dad, Pat Cote, look identical. That's his great-grandfather. My grandfather, Peter Shingus, and my son, Gabriel, look identical. That's his great-grandson. So we really believe in that. Okay. All right, okay. Niin. Nose. Nemesomes. Dan Kopichigan. Niin. Ngozes. Nenose. Noses. Dan Kopichigan. Niin. Nga. No ko. Dan Kopichigan. Niin. Danes. Nenose. Noses. Dan Kopichigan. And that's your immediate family. I don't want to, oh yeah, I don't want to make
That's
it.
okay.
Okay, all right. So then I ask Kawainin tan Kupichikanak. So Frank Agi utan Kupichikanayan. Frank was my late great grandfather, Frank Cote. He came from Cote Reserve. He was a ceremonial man. He was actually a warrior. He went to the war. He was injured. He come home with a wound. But he was a very powerful man. And today I still hear stories about him from other warriors' children. You know, that's how far his stories carried on. He was very powerful. Even in the war, he helped his fellow members with his praying in that, because he took what he had with him to the war. He was told to. Piwapik Upines was his Kaki Anishinaabe Weezuwit. Iron Thunderbird was his Anishinaabe name. Ellen Kaki Utan Kupichikanayan. Ellen was my late great-grandmother. Ellen came from Kizakus First Nation. She was the daughter of Chief William Cusans. She was a Cusans. And actually, there's even more to that. Her mother come from Manitoba. She was a Contois. So, and then her grandmother, which was Her mother was Suzanne. Suzanne's mother, Marie Contois, was one of the first ones that came into Saskatchewan. John Shingus Gagi Utan Kupachiganayan. John Shingus was my great-grandfather. He was from Valley River. His name Shingus is Shingush, which is a weasel. Grace Rattlesnake Gagi Utan Kupachiganayan. Grace Rattlesnake was my great-grandmother, and she come from Wewesikapo. And she married my grandfather, Peter, and got into Valley River. There's not much I know about them because they were gone before I was born. They passed away. And because I was raised in Saskatchewan, I didn't get to really learn much about my mom's family. I know quite a bit about my grandparents, my grandfather and grandmother, because they had family members that married there. So we'd go and visit right in Valley River. Awaning Gitche Tan Kupachikanak. Who are my great-great-grandparents? Joe Cody Gitche Tan Kupachikanipan. Joe Cody was my late great-grandfather. He had a spirit name. I couldn't find it. I did have a picture of him. I can't find it. He was actually he was a chief too for our reserve. He was married to Mashkikiwapu. Medicine Water was my late great-grandmother. She had no English name. This was her name. And these two could speak both Anishinaabe and I know Joe Cody could speak English. Mashkikiwapu barely any English. Wayne nak ngi kichik tan kupachikane nak. Awene nak ni giche dan kopichigan nak. See, and what we can't say when we say great, we just add that big to it. Yeah, adding kiche to make it great. Who are my great grandparents? Gabriel Cody ngi kiche dan kopichiganepan. Gabriel Cody was my great grandfather. Pagoche umi ka ki Anishinaabe Weezuit. Wild Pigeon was his Anishinaabe name, and he was our signatory for our reserve. He wasn't chief. Gabriel Cody was a mixture of Anishinaabe, French, and Cree. Métis. He could speak all these languages. That's why they asked him to be the signatory, because he could understand English, he could understand French. And he was one of the last chiefs to sign the treaties because he wanted a school on his reserve where they were taught by their own people. They starved them out. And we did get 2 schools on the reserve, but we weren't taught by our people. I was trying to find his picture. He never wanted his picture taken. There's no pictures of him anywhere because he believed that it captured your soul. But there is drawings of him. He was the type of man that was a loner. He lived alone. He lived up in, he had a place up by what's today present-day Togo, and in Duck Mountain, what's today Madge Lake. That was our territory, and that's where he stayed around there. Oh no, that's it for my great-great-grandparents. So these are pictures of them. Frank and Ellen Cody are the first picture there. Below them is Chief William Cusant's family, his wife and his sons and 2 daughters. On the other side is my grandmother's parents, Sarah Cashane and Old Chotty Stevenson. Sarah Cashane, my grandmother's mom was from Kizakos. She was a Cashane. The Cashanes originally come from Manitoba. Cashaneo was their name. And that's a Cree term. That's why I say we're a mixture of Anishinaabe, Cree, and Métis, because we're all mixed. My grandmother, at the bottom there's my grandfather, Peter Shingus. I don't have any pictures of my grandmother. I have one, but I couldn't find it, and it's not very clear. Of my grandmother, Eliza. And there's my mom in the corner, the top corner. Like I said, my mom became an alcoholic. She died at 57. I'm 58 right now. So she didn't make it to see anything, like really our children, our grandchildren. There's my dad, my late dad, Pat Cote, and there is the one that's also a part of my family. And I call her Nimama Khan, my stepmother. You know, when I did my thesis, we were trying to look for a word for stepmother. And we asked my grandfather, well, what could we use? He said, you can't, they're either your mother or they're not. And I said, but she doesn't want me to put her as my mother because I have a mother. That's what my stepmother told me. You use your mom because I'm not your mother. So my grandfather said, well, her fake mother. So Nimama Khan, that's what we use for stepmother. And in the bottom is my grandparents and their children, where I come from. That was their 50th anniversary. My oldest uncle, Boyche, who was one of my great teachers. My dad, Pat, there, and then my uncle Lawrence, another one of my teachers. Then my auntie Margaret, my mentor, my sister, my auntie. You know, she was everything to me. And then my grandparents. On the other side is my mom and her two brothers. They were three were brought to Saskatchewan from Manitoba. So not only them had helped me, I had other family members. I had family members from Valley River that moved this way, and one of them that really helped me a lot was my grandfather, Robert Bones Shingos. He used to come and visit me, or I'd go pick him up and he'd give me teachings of what I had to know. And I was very thankful for that. He was going to tell me more. He knew a lot about my grandmother, his sister-in-law. He was going to tell me more about my grandparents. But he got sick and he passed away. So he was one of my influential teachers. Another one is late Lambert Cashane. That was another one that any place I'd be, he'd call me and I have to tell you something. And he'd always give me a teaching. When I was a child, it was the Blackbirds, the Saganases. Those are my teachers. They used to live in the bush up in Peepaw. They lived the old way. It was just in the 80s they came out of the bush. They didn't know how to work electricity, anything like that. We had to teach them. But they lived that old way yet. But those were my teachers. Old Slim Saganas, he used to come to my grandparents and he was a fluent speaker, could barely speak English because he'd knock on the door, open door. Open door, Slim at door. That's how he would speak. He broke in English. So when he'd come in, he'd call me teacher. Then I knew what that meant, so I'd go get a book. I'd come back and I'd teach him an English word. Then he'd give me another Soto word. And he would laugh when he'd make me say it, and then he'd laugh, and that's good. And then I heard him and my grandfather talking in the language, and he told my grandfather, she's going to be a teacher. And at that time, I was young, and I was thinking, I don't want to be a teacher. You know, and I didn't think of it. When I started this journey, when I started thinking of all my teachers, this is my path. That old man told me that long ago, and I didn't listen. He saw it in me. That was my path. He told my grandfather, she's going to be a teacher. She's going to teach people language. And that's what I'm doing today. And I grew up speaking the language because of my grandparents. And it wasn't until I went to school that's where I stopped it. I didn't go to residential school. My grandparents wouldn't allow us to. I went to town school, the neighboring town. Well, I went to the reserve school for 1 year, where we were hit if we did anything wrong. And this was kindergarten. You know, we had a teacher that was sent to us by the government or the Department of Indian Affairs, and she was mean. And she wouldn't let us speak the language, the ones that knew it. So then when we went to the neighboring town school again there, we were made fun of. We were, told we're not going to need it. So I quit speaking it. I'd only speak it once in a while. I left it alone up until I was drinking. I I always said I wasn't gonna drink, seeing all this alcohol, all this trauma. I always said that's not gonna be me. But I shouldn't have said that because I ended up an alcoholic. So I ended up drinking, not caring. But when I'd go visit, because I ended up living in the fort trying to go to business school. And I'd go to the neighboring reserves, Muscapeting, Pasqua, go visit. It was in Muscapeting I met up with old George Capo. I'd go and visit them. As soon as I get drunk, I'd sling out soda to him. And he'd laugh, how come you don't speak when you're sober? And I told him, I don't know. And when I was sober, I'd be just quiet. And that's how it went for me while I was drinking. Just using it when I was drinking. And so when I sobered up, I realized, well, I felt more relaxed. I think I'll have to stay drunk. No, I'm just kidding. But you're more relaxed, and so that's why I was able to let it out. So now I try hard. Like, I call myself a latent learner. Where I had it, I left it alone. Now I'm going back to it. I'm getting it back. I'm starting to use it. So latent learner means that it's there. It's hidden. You're not using it. Now I'm bringing it back. And this is how I do it. And I speak to myself because I have nobody to help me at home. I do have what I call him Ninim, my adopted uncle. He helps me a lot. And I have a lot of those. I have a lot of Ninamak, a lot of adopted relatives that help me. So that's the journey that's the journey that I have been on. I had to look at who am I first as a person. And you know what, this journey that took me around, I'm actually at peace with myself. I know who I am. I know who I don't have to pretend to be. I don't have to pretend to be anybody. I know who I am. So ni nanuka sik. That's who I am. I know who I am. Chimigwech. Kinanako minanim. Kigawapa minanim minawa. Thank you all. A big thanks. I'm grateful, thankful to you all, and I'll see you again.